Sorry for the disruption. Right, let's get back to the 6th point I've made about what Simamane told us about. Right, we are presented with an understanding of the tenets of CRT. Now, we never had that. So what's the tenets of CRT? And this is quite interesting. The first one is counter-storytelling. The second one is the permanence of racism, then whiteness as property, and interest convergence. And then there's liberalism again. Remember, we had it in the last practical session. So what's counter-storytelling? This tenet foregrounds the stories of marginalized communities. And that's also part of a decolonization thing. Now, to me, this is very much what the ancient myths used to do. They used to create counter stories of reality, so that it made reality more, it made it better for people. And the myths counted evil practices mostly. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. Now, the permanence of racism. Racism is seen as inherent part of a US civilization, normalized and organized to favor being white or act as white. It is part of the rest of the world, but racist practices can only be openly debated and counteracted in a liberal Western system. Now, what do they mean by normalized? It means it's everywhere, I assume. The thing is this, we can talk about critical race theory, we can talk about intersectionality, about sexual orientation specifically, in the United States, in Europe, in South Africa, because we've got democracies, because we've got freedom of speech. You try this in China, North Korea, Russia, and see what happens. You try it in some African countries, some South American countries, and see what happens. It's just not allowed. So democracies and liberalism may be really bad if you can talk about things, even things which goes against the grain of liberalism. Liberalism must be bad. Whiteness as property has never made any sense to me. In all these years that I've been involved in human diversity and exclusion, not inclusion. Well, what they mean is it's the possession of land, the right to enjoy things, to enjoy land, to enjoy the fact that your father can leave you some money, to make the decision who has the right to live. So if you can make the decision as a white person who's got the right to live, it means you can kill black people and there will be no consequences. In general. Is that true? Yeah, I don't know. As I said, it never made sense to me. It's only a projection. Remember, we talked about this projection of modernism. So whiteness is property. Is also very much a projection. It's an imaginary thing, which talks about things in real life, but as seen from the imagination. With white as property, it is perfectly revolutionary mobilization talk. This is a way to mobilize people for revolution. People that hurt, people with no purpose, or feel they've got no purpose, or right no purpose. If you want to mobilize them for a revolution, this is the way to do it. Yet, they say we don't do it. When interest is convergence, is about white people as being the primary beneficiaries of a system. I assume that if white people are then the primary beneficiaries, when I assume that the secondary beneficiaries are created with affirmative action policies and practices. So affirmative action then, if white interest convergence is generally true, means that affirmative action is for secondary beneficiaries. And who's not benefiting at all is my question. From affirmative action. Right. Next, it's a critique on liberalism. We had this before. In this case, colorblindness allows people to ignore racist policies that perpetuate social inequality. So colorblindness is a problem. Remember, that's what liberalism tells us to be, is to be colorblind, to be non-racist. I've got quite a few things to say about liberalism and especially colorblindness. Remember that liberalism is purely a projection from critical theory. Purely a projection. And remember we said it was an 1850 variation of it. So it's not even recent. I'll stick to that. Now, what about being colorblind or seeing color? Seeing color is what led to apartheid. Seeing color is what led to segregation in America. Seeing color is what they told the person of color to go to the back of a bus or to ride on the third class rail coaches. That's what seeing color is all about. And that's why liberalism wanted color blindness. But not color blindness in a sense that you don't see the person, that you don't see, that you just see through the person as if that person doesn't exist. That's not at all what liberalism is about. Go and read about it if you really don't understand it. Here's my question. If I have to see color, if I have to see some gender identity or sexual orientation identity, but my job is to program a robot who's going to serve clients at a desk at a hotel, for instance, how do I code these different things into that robot so that the robot can respond appropriately? Or is the robot going to turn around and tell me, don't see my robotism? Or please see my robotism? Which one? I'm not sure which one will happen. That's my question. If you get an answer for that, well, we can talk. Now we give examples of racism, and she gives an example of Amy Cooper. Remember, we had these examples before. Now, Amy Cooper walked with a dog. She did not put the dog on a leash, which is an offense actually. And the black man came to her and asked her to put the dog on a leash. And then she said, "Hey buddy, get away from me. I'm going to phone the police and telling them that you are harassing a white woman," as a black man. In my opinion, that's racist. Absolutely. My question again, is it general? Is that what happens every time? Or is it only white people that may break the law? I'm not sure. From a white person's perspective, that is. So, yeah. If it's not a general thing, I can take this one example and say, yes, this is racist. But I can't generalize from there. Because if it was true as a general thing, again, I'm saying, in the USA, we wouldn't have had an immigration problem, a border problem. So liberalism on keeping people out of the United States. Right, my 8th point, and this is about an understanding of intersectionality as understood in the United States. And it's defined as follows. Intersectionality is a metaphor, remember a metaphor, for understanding how multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage sometimes compound themselves, which then create obstacles that are often not understood in conventional ways of thinking about anti-racism or feminism or whatever social justice advocates we have. Open-ended. And this was Kimberly Crenshaw's definition of intersectionality. In principle, I've got no problem with this. In principle, it's true. In principle, laws do not foresee every problem. And judges must fill in the gaps. So, yes, it can be a problem if a judge looks at a black woman only as a black person or only as a woman to make a judgment call. So in principle, I've got no problem with it. But as Audre Lorde said, there is no single issue because we do not live single issue lives. I can agree with that as well. I think that's wisdom. What you do with it is another thing. Right. There is multiple identities and they do interact in a dynamic way. Point number 9. We are presented with an understanding of intersectionality, and it is purposed to do what? The following, according to them. Help us understand the complex issue of oppression and privilege. Okay. Help us identify and challenge all forms of demographic discrimination and oppression in order to effectively address social injustices. Paired with oppression, it is clear that the reference is to unfair discrimination. That's what they want to stop us, unfair discrimination, not only in a legal perspective, but everywhere. But remember, they said demographic discrimination and oppression. Not intellectual. Remember lecture 5? We had personal demographic, we had psychological demographic, functionality, developmental. We had 6 of them in total. 6 of them in total. Here we're only talking about social demographic. It's lean and mean. It must help us to understand the simultaneous entanglement of inequality, but account for relationships of power, and reveal how these systemic relationships impact people's experiences negatively. I can go with that. Then it must also help us to magnify the structures of social injustice and change what is needed in institutional structures. Remember I said to you that little white cone goes like that, and it's into social demographic and institutions, and that to them is all what human diversity is all about, which we've already shown is a very, very narrow look on what is going on. Then intersectionality will help us to identify a lack of provision of resources for dealing with intersecting issues and social injustices. So we want more resources. You go into any organization, and the first thing I'll tell you is, we want more resources of some kind. That's what we all do. I also want more resources. Right, it helps us to understand that when multiple intersecting demographic oppressive discriminations combine, they compound, and it's reinforced. Again, we've got this reinforcing loop. Right, and it's about experiences of oppression. It helps us to describe the problems of black women in the United States. Black and women with a law for gender and racially based court cases, because black women endure both racial and gender discrimination. We had that earlier and I've discussed it, so I'm not going to discuss it anymore. Right, we are informed that the scope of intersectionality has expanded from race and gender to include. So what's all included in this intersectionality? I mentioned this one earlier, disability, yet you seldom see it. Sexual orientation, you always see it. But it's a new thing. It emerged about less than 10 years ago. Then we've got classism. Remember what was his name? Marx was all about. Then colonialism. The only country I think who's trying to be a colonial power at the moment is Russia, but they are normally excluded. Ableism. I'm not sure how that relates to disability, I'm not sure. Sexism. How that relates to sexual orientation, I'm not sure. Education. Family status, which is an important one, and you never hear about it. Age. Should I not know better about that? But you never hear about that. Actually, they say, when you look at them, they talk about old people. What they never talk about is us young people. They're forgetting about us. 18 to 25s. What about us? Why talk about the 60 to 80-year-olds and leave us alone? Okay. Right. Occupation, which is an important one. We had it in that hexagon, but otherwise you never see it. Then they've got immigration status. What they mean by that, nobody knows, because they never talk about the immigrants, current immigrants. History and heritage, which they work in some strange way. Geography and location, which they sometimes work in a strange way. Religion. Religion is very important. It's actually the one most common to be first when you ask people about his or her identity. But yeah, it's in academia, it's very seldom seen. And then language, of course, which goes back to racism. So I've got no problem with this. It's just that how they discriminate against the different intersectionality criteria that bothers me. There's a lot of discrimination going on. Now let's look at South Africa's case. We are presented with a South African case that added querying and transformation into higher education to the race and gender mix to create a needed multiplicity for transformation. However, then came the surprising situations, which is a kind of contextualization. So, why queer now all of a sudden became part of it, I'm not sure. But it's because someone wrote something in an academic paper, and it's now that important. Now, they complain that South Africa is not yet a decolonized space, even after fees must fall. Now, I've got a lot to say about that one. Also, they claim South Africa is viewed with a lens of privileged white groups. I've even got more to say about that one. It sounds like 1984 Newspeak. If you've read that book, all of a sudden, I can't remember the writer. Anyone here can tell me who the writer was? Any name? Nobody knows. Okay. Next time I'll tell you. I'll have to go back. I can't remember. But you're getting used to me forgetting things. Now, this is me talking. I wonder how a decolonized country look like. I really do. They had the opportunity to inform us, but they chose to not do that, leaving us guessing about the nature of this equality outcome of a decolonized country. I assume it's a decolonized outcome. I beg you to at least define the scope of decolonization. I've heard this word so many times, and I really do not know what it means. It actually started that black people, say in South Africa, for example, do not want to learn about Shakespeare. They want to learn about the stories and the poems of African people, Southern African people. And that I can understand. What we miss out on an international stage is that there's a lot of things which comes from exactly what somebody like Shakespeare did. So when they get onto the international stage, they won't have that knowledge, and then they will complain that they are excluded from the gossip which is going on. Of course they will. They are the victims. Now, Fees must fall had nothing to do with decolonization. That was a way to disrupt the ruling party. That was a way to disrupt the campuses. Not that I don't think that there could be a problem with fees. America has got the same problem with people still paying back their university fees years after they've started working. So, that I understand, but don't confuse the issue. Roads must fall was more of a decolonizing thing. Not fees must fall. Get your facts straight. You're doing a PhD and you can't even get recent and simple facts straight. Yes, these are to the PhD students. How far PhDs went down in quality. You just can't believe it. Right. I wonder how the communist-backed Black Freedom Movement, the ANC, whose members have been ruling over South Africa for 40 years, are viewing social injustice through a white privileged group lens, when that group is only 9% of a population and falling because white people, middle class people, are leaving the country, those who can afford it. I'm still here, I can't afford to go. Okay. All right. So I'm here out of what? What do you think? Not because I can't afford it to go, but because of loyalty. Oh, I see. Yes, okay, true. Right. There's another point. The black middle class outnumber the white middle class because of the implementation of aggressive affirmative action and black economic empowerment. So the middle class now has shifted to black people. So we are still looking through the lens of a privileged group, whites. I think you even have to not generalize that much. Now, what about the other skin tones? Some of them were affirmed as second class or third class members of the black community, because it was always about black first economic empowerment. And black first economic empowerment created a very super rich group of people in South Africa. Super rich, driving the most expensive cars. And yeah, okay, living like the sheikhs. And do you think there's no poor white people in this country? Yeah, there are shacks with white people in them. So all of that is gone. And remember one thing, the ANC is analyzed worldwide as being one of the 13 to 15 most corrupt organizations in the world. Remember that. So, thank you for listening to my critical and dialectic analysis, and I hope for a heated discussion when we come back from this short break. Thank you very much. Go and have your break.